And your SEC Insider Hit today is brought to you by Ace Bolt and Screw, powered by DeWalt Tools, locations in downtown Jackson, Gluckstadt, Tupelo, and Atlanta. Ace Bolt and Screw, powered by DeWalt Tools, new location in Gluckstadt, Madison County, acebolt.net. We're live in the Bank Plus studio, ESPN 105.9 The Zone, WRKS, the Out of Bounds Show. We welcome in our friend Brad Edwards, College Game Day on ESPN Radio. And Brad, 3 Big 12 teams were upset. Georgia Tech upsets Florida State. Who are you most impressed with over the weekend?
Most impressed. This is probably not the answer you're looking for, but Arkansas State, when you look at not only the upset they pulled, but how many players they did it without, they had a bunch. I'm not sure if it was all COVID, but I want to say it was somewhere in the neighborhood of like 13 guys they had out. And I was looking at the depth chart right before the start of the game. Someone had posted it on Twitter and had lines crossed through the guys who were out. And I had called their bowl game last year on radio, so I'm pretty familiar with their personnel. And especially on defense, there were some pretty significant losses. So for them to be able to win a game on the road against a Big 12 team under those circumstances, I thought was really impressive.
Yeah, Blake Anderson's done a great job there, Brad. He lost his wife last year to cancer.
He's an easy guy to root for, isn't he?
No question. He's had a winning season every single year he's been there, Brad.
Yeah. And you think about the turnover. I don't want to call it turmoil because the program was still doing very well, but the turnover they had at head coach, I want it was like 5. They had something like 5 coaches in a row. Hugh Freeze was one of them, and then Gus Malzahn was one that stayed 1 year and left. And then Anderson comes in, and now he's given them some stability. And I have no idea whether he's interested in moving anywhere. Obviously, the circumstances, in his life have created a unique situation where not only, is it possible that his goals have changed because of it, but I think it's fair to say that, he's developed a bond with that school through all of it that, maybe he's not interested in going anywhere, at least not anytime soon. So they've got a good coach and a really good program for Group 5 level.
6 or 7 straight years winning seasons for Blake Anderson at Arkansas State. Spent 4 years at Southern Miss, Brad, and we were discussing this earlier. I didn't realize the sizable gap in athletic department revenue. Maybe I should have. Between Arkansas State and Southern Miss. It's about $15 million. And so we were kind of throwing around the fact that Blake Anderson was there with Fedora, and everybody liked him and so on. But Arkansas State's paying $825 plus bonuses, I'm sure. Southern Miss was paying Hobson $500,000. But then some Southern Miss fans pointed out to us, Brad, that before Hobson with Monken, they were paying $825. They just had to get some things straight as far as budget. Did you realize there was that sizable of a gap between revenue between the athletic departments?
No, and if you had just mentioned that there was a gap, my first assumption, just because of football, would have been that it was the other way. The Southern Miss was the one with more money. Now, it doesn't surprise me that Southern Miss doesn't have a lot of money, but like I said, my instinct would have been that they would have had more just because they've been better at football for a lot longer. But as we know, look, being successful on the field, especially with it having been, look, let's be honest, for Southern Miss, it was a while ago now. That doesn't equate to money as far as what your program makes. So,
right.
It is a little bit surprising. I think the bottom line is if anyone's looking for next, head coach at Southern Miss candidates, at best, this is a lateral move. And as we discussed, with all the things that have happened with Blake Anderson, in his life and all that, I think that he has a pretty special connection with that school, and I cannot imagine him leaving there unless it is a significant pay raise and a significantly different opportunity. I mean, it would have to be at least a middle of the pack Power 5 school, I would think, for him to leave.
You know, when you and I were growing up here, Brad Edwards with ESPN on the Out of Bounds show and the Parish Brewing guest line, Bobby Collins was at Southern Miss before going to SMU. Reggie Collier, the Nasty Bunch. Then they go, you know, to Carmody and Hallman and eventually Bauer. I mean, they won and won and won. And in 23 of the last 26 seasons right now, they've had winning seasons. But there's just been and you know what? They were better than Mississippi State and or Ole Miss a lot of the time when you and I were growing up. But,
oh yeah,
but the train has left the deal because of the money.
Everything changed. Exactly, and that's what it was. And you know what? I have family who went to Southern Miss and have been very frustrated about it. And one of the lines that has been mentioned multiple times is the only reason that Mississippi State and Ole Miss are in a better situation than Southern is right now is because they had the right relationships back in 1933 when the SEC formed. And for a long time, it didn't really make that much of an advantage for them. But in the last 20 years or so, as the money has increased significantly, just the fact that they were in the SEC has proven to be, and even for a school like Vanderbilt, I mean, you look around, like every Power 5 league has one or two teams that if there were to be a redraft, if you were just to create a pool of teams and say, okay, you draft the ones you want, every Power 5 league has one or two teams. There's no way that they would pick now to be in their league if they were doing it over again. But those schools just benefited from being in the right place at the right time, and they're already part of the league, and they're not going to get kicked out. So they're able to survive where other teams that are, in their region are not as lucky because they don't have the same type of money.
Brad Edwards on the Out of Bounds show. Blake, you've got a question for Brad?
Yeah, Brad. Not to get too far down the rabbit hole, but Southern Miss chose, or however you want to phrase it, but they stuck with the Conference USA. The AAC, when it became big, seems to have taken over the G5 power spot. When I look at revenue, almost all of the top G5 schools are from the AAC. Was that the end of Southern Miss, or is there anything in the future of college football with this new landscape that we're looking at and maybe a change to the dynamic of Power 5 conferences? Is there anything Southern can do to elevate where they are, or are they just kind of, ship has sailed, it's too late?
I don't see it. I'm not sure what other type of arrangement would come up where someone would be interested in bringing them into their league. I mean, the thing with the AAC when it formed, when the Big East broke apart, they were really focused on big markets. And so obviously Hattiesburg, no place in Mississippi really was going to fit that bill. And so they were, and that's not to say that they don't have any. You've got an East Carolina in there, and I can't remember. There are a couple of others. But for the most part, they were teams that were in a city, that had a pretty good population, and there was a natural fan base there and a TV market because of it. And of course, even that part has changed. I mean, we remember, it was less than 10 years ago when you had the conference realignment, and a lot of those decisions were based on TV market, and that's why a program like Missouri was so attractive to the SEC, was because you had both the St. Louis and Kansas City markets that in theory would go along with Missouri. That's why Rutgers was attractive to the Big Ten, because it's kind of like almost the New York market. But the New Jersey's right up next to Philadelphia as well. And so those types of decisions were really big when you're talking about increasing the cable footprint. But in the few years since then, cable is kind of, falling off, and I don't know what the model is now. If teams were to be looking for, if conferences were to be looking for new teams now, what would be the primary traits that would be attractive to them? I'm not sure, but I'm also pretty sure that Southern Miss wouldn't have any of them. So I I really don't see an easy step up for them. And I think the same thing is, just not to pick on Southern Miss, I think the same thing is true for pretty much any team in Conference USA or the Sun Belt. If you're just looking at there are very few of those that I can imagine having a clear path to improve their situation.
All right, we're going to switch gears here. Brad Edwards, College Game Day on ESPN, joining us on the Out of Bounds show. As far as Georgia Tech pulls an upset, and we're familiar with Jeff Collins. He was on Mullen's staff at Mississippi State. Always thought he was sharp and so on. He seems to be doing a good job. When you look at the game of the week for this week, are you going? You may have another one other than these two, but are you going Miami and Louisville, or Central Florida and Georgia Tech, or something else, Brad?
Yeah, I think UCF Georgia Tech is interesting because I think UCF is one of those few teams outside of the Power Five that could make a case for itself to be included in the playoff. Now, of course, some of this has to do with, does the Big Ten jump back in here? And if they do, come in late, will the selection committee, consider them eligible to be a part of it? I think they would. But if that doesn't happen, UCF is one of those that if they were to go undefeated could really put some pressure on the committee. And obviously, with what Georgia Tech did on Saturday, it would create more value for a win over them than if they'd lost that game. And look, I'm assuming Georgia Tech is not going to be as bad as a lot of people thought. I kind of felt like coming into the season that they'd be a good bit better on offense because it was such a transition last year. And a lot of the groundwork was laid there. They just needed a better quarterback, a quarterback who fit, a new system. And he's going to make his mistakes, and he's going to have some bad games. He had a bad first half, too, with a couple of picks against FSU. But Georgia Tech's going to be better. Anyway, to answer your question, that game is interesting to me. I think Miami and Louisville is the biggest game. Louisville is a team that, because they don't play Clemson in the regular season, I think could really make the ACC race interesting. They have a dynamic offense, and I'm really looking forward to seeing them against Miami. We know Miami has a good defensive team and obviously an improved offense with De'Aaron King. So this, to me, is a really intriguing game, and if Louisville puts on a good performance here, I think they're a team to kind of keep an eye on in the ACC. Like I said, because they don't play Clemson, they're one that could very easily end up, at the very least, in the ACC championship game. At the very best, maybe they're able to kind of keep their name into the playoff hunt late in the season.
Manny Diaz, Scott Satterfield. That's a 6:30 kick in Louisville this weekend. I know it's only one game, Brad. Notre Dame looked okay against Duke.
Yeah.
Clemson, of course, was going to dominate Wake Forest. And this is not a fair question, but after 1 week, can Notre Dame match up and give Clemson a run for their money in this weird ACC championship race this year?
Well, I didn't see anything in week one to make me lean in that direction. But what I did see in week one is just there's a lot of upheaval with rosters. And I don't know if this is going to continue throughout the season. I really don't know what reason there would be to, assume that it's going to get a lot better as the season goes on. But when you look across the college football landscape and you see the number of teams that are missing multiple starters because of, and look, you've always had the injuries, suspensions, those types of things. And now when you throw COVID on top of it, and it's not even necessarily a positive test, it can be the tracing where you were just connected to someone who tested positive. So there were a bunch of teams that were missing key players last weekend. And I can see the possibility that, look, if Clemson's got the wrong guys out when they play Notre Dame, Notre Dame's got a better chance than most teams in the ACC of being able to pull that upset. And I think the same thing is very true when you get into the SEC. And you look at it, but the biggest thing with the SEC is because there are so many top 25 recruiters in that conference. I'll just use Alabama as the example. A&M is a school that recruits pretty well. But what we've seen over the last few years is that even with a bunch of four-star players in that roster, they're no match for Alabama when Alabama's at full strength. Okay, but there are a lot of teams with top 25 talent in the SEC. But if they catch Alabama on a day when they've got 5 starters out because of whatever, and the opponent has most of its key guys there, that levels the playing field significantly, where all of a sudden a team like an Alabama or like a Georgia is much more susceptible to being upset if they were simply having to rely on a team being decimated by injuries or something like that. So I don't know if Clemson is going to be as vulnerable just because they're so far ahead of everyone else in that conference from a talent standpoint. But I think we are going to see more upsets than we normally do, just because I think you're going to have across the board in college football more teams missing starters week in and week out.
Brad Edwards, ESPN on the Out of Bounds show. Speaking of A&M, Blake just told me before the show that now with another guy dropping out, that A&M has 2 wide receivers returning that have 3 receptions combined.
Yeah, for 15 yards and no touchdowns.
Okay, so it won't matter against Vandy, but in week 2 against Alabama, Brad,
yeah,
holy smokes, right?
Yeah, exactly. Now, look, they've recruited well, and I don't know how many guys that got in that depth chart who were, 4 stars and probably have some talent. But there's a chemistry that has to be developed between a quarterback and receivers. The quarterback's got to have confidence in those guys. They're going to be in the right place, the right time. And I know Jake Fromm took a lot of heat last year, but you certainly saw some of that with Georgia a year ago, where he had a bunch of young receivers that he wasn't used to playing with, and they weren't where he was expecting them to be. And the whole passing game looked like a real mess, especially for the first half of the season. And as experienced as Kellen Mond is, you could get some of that at A&M. And I think that's been the reason that so many people have been high on A&M, is because of the number of returning starters they had and the fact that you've got a 4-year starter at quarterback. The assumption with that is that the passing game is going to be in sync. But you take receivers out of there who were his main targets, and now all of a sudden, I don't know that his experience is as valuable if the receivers don't. I don't want to say they don't know what they're doing, but look, offenses are pretty complex, and there's a lot of reading involved, not just by the quarterback. And I don't know how much Jimbo does of this, but there's a lot with with receivers having to make reads in some of this, and they've got to be on the same page, and the results can be disastrous when they're not. You see balls that are thrown right to a DB, and it looks really bad for the quarterback, but the truth is, in many of those cases, the receiver didn't make the right read. So, that's not good news when you got to play Alabama in week 2 and the quarterback's still trying to, figure out his receivers.
And Brad Edwards, College Game Day on ESPN Radio. Brad, think about this. Jimbo's been there. This is year 3. He's recruited really well. After Vandy, they play Bama, then Florida, and then Mississippi State. And that MSU game's in Starkville, and Leach is known as a kind of upset waiting to happen. But can you imagine? I mean, they have more talent, but can you imagine if he lost all 3?
No. I mean, even if he started 2-2, I think that would be pretty damaging. I don't think many A&M fans are expecting them to contend for the division. I say many. Every fan base, has their crazies. But I just can't. I can't believe there are too many A&M fans with him being in year 3 with a 4-year starter at quarterback. Would expect them to already be out of the SEC West race, maybe 3 weeks in. I mean, so that to me is that's something to keep an eye on. But like you said, that the schedule didn't do them any favors, because when it got jumbled up and then they got Florida added to it, Florida was an addition, right? I'm trying to remember exactly how that went. I think it was A&M Florida was one of the added games.
I think so, bro.
But yeah, I mean that's a rough draw. By the way, did you see the SEC shorts?
No, somebody sent it this morning, and I haven't had an opportunity to watch it.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's the most recent one, but I saw it a few days ago. It was on the A&M schedule, and that was part of it. Which is the schedule looked really because the original schedule, sure they were playing in Tuscaloosa, but it was late in the season,
right?
Initially. And so now you get Alabama early, and obviously you lose head to head to the division favorite right out of the gate, and your chances of winning the division are, I mean, I don't want to say they're zero, but now you need Alabama to lose 2 conference games and you can't lose another one. I mean, that's a brutal way to start. I mean, if you don't pull that upset, and then if you were to compound it by losing again the following week, I mean, realistically, you're pretty much done in the division.
Man, if A&M starts out 1-3, because see, even though that game's well, first of all, there will not be 105,000 people in the stands in College Station, but
for Florida, no.
Yeah,
no.
For Florida, I think Mullen's a better coach. How do you see it?
Oh yeah. No, you and I have talked about this a good bit. I don't dislike Jimbo as a coach. I mean, in fact, I like him as a person. I enjoy spending time around him. But I just think he's overrated. And once again, I mean, he didn't rate himself, but there's a lot of love for him because he's won a national title, and that's hard to do. I don't want to take that away from him. There aren't many guys active who have done that. But if we're honest, you know, outside of 2 years where he had the eventual number 1 pick in the draft as his quarterback, I think it's hard to pick a lot of seasons where you would say that they met expectations. And so, you know, you compare that to Mullen. I mean, yeah, I would say performance relative to expectations, Mullen has been far better than Jimbo as a head coach.
I think we could do, Brad, like 30 minutes on comparing Jimbo Fisher and Les Miles, and just well, anyway, we may do that at some point. But yeah, I think Jimbo could.
Poor Les.
No kidding. No kidding.
What can you say when you're getting taken behind the woodshed by Coastal Carolina?
Coastal Carolina. I didn't even know they played football, and I was just watching a little bit.
Kansas knows, because that's the second year in a row they've lost.
I knew they had won the baseball, the national championship in baseball. Didn't they, Blake? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, they did a few years ago.
I thought so. All right, man. Have a great week, and we may catch up again soon. Later this week, but have a great week. We appreciate it.
Okay. You guys too. Take care.
See you, bud. Brad Eberts, College Game Day on ESPN Radio. I was just thinking that with Brad, we could have really, really gone down that rabbit hole.
I'd love to have
Jimbo.
I'd love to have his conversation on how you have to have an offensive guy when you're not a high recruiter. You have to.
Yes.
It's proof in the pudding. Jimbo will never. We could do this all day.
Right. But if he starts off 1-3, dude, they play Alabama, Florida, and Mississippi State back to back to back.
They're favored only in one of those.
I mean, Bama and Florida should win so best case is 2-2. But you recruit better than Florida, and the game's at home, and I still like Mullen and the Gators and Kyle Trask and Todd Grantham. Hey, thanks for listening to the show. Don't forget about the podcast on Apple Podcasts, and download the Out of Bounds Radio app if you get a chance. Thanks for listening to the show, brought to you by the Charbroiled Oysters at Drago's Seafood Restaurant and Oyster Bar.